The protagonist of today's case is Dong Wenhui, born and raised in a rural village in Shanxi Province, China. Though her family wasn't wealthy, it was a warm and peaceful home where her parents loved each other deeply, and the siblings looked out for one another. Wenhui was the second child in the family, with an older sister above her and a younger brother below. Among all the children, she was the only one to pass the college entrance exam, becoming a tremendous source of pride for her family and earning admiration from everyone in the village. In the eyes of those around her, Wenhui was a capable, hard-working young woman with remarkable ambition. Villagers often said she was different, not just because of her academic achievements, but because of a maturity and composure rarely seen in someone so young. Driven by her belief in the power of education, Wenhui harbored a clear aspiration from an early age: to change her own fate and lift her family out of poverty. Her personality was incredibly resilient, yet never loud or showy. Wenhui was the type of person who could endure enormous pressure, accustomed to shouldering burdens alone without complaint. Her life seemed to follow a quiet but unwavering trajectory: leave the countryside and establish herself in the city. After the college entrance exam, Wenhui was admitted to medical school, an already difficult path made even more challenging for a girl with no family connections or social support. Her years of study passed under strict discipline and heavy pressure, but through remarkable perseverance, she pushed through step by step. After graduation, Wenhui navigated multiple rounds of rigorous selection and was finally hired by a prestigious hospital in Xi'an, officially becoming a registered nurse with a permanent position, a stable career that many could only dream of. It must be emphasized that in the cutthroat competitive environment of major Chinese cities, for a girl from the countryside with no connections or backing to achieve this was extraordinarily rare. Behind what appeared to be a quiet success lay hardships that outsiders could hardly begin to imagine. After starting work, Wenhui maintained the same frugal and disciplined lifestyle she'd had as a student. Every expense was carefully calculated, and everything was planned meticulously. She rarely allowed herself to live carelessly or on impulse. Each month, she faithfully sent money home to her parents, and her older sister and younger brother frequently received her support as well. Gradually, Wenhui became the most reliable pillar of the entire family, the person everyone could count on for any matter, big or small. Driven by her desire to truly establish herself in Xi'an, she saved every penny she could. While many of her peers still depended on their families, Wenhui had already purchased a small apartment in Xi'an on her own. In the eyes of her parents and relatives, she was the greatest pride of the family, the daughter they never had to worry about, always self-reliant, mature, and dependable. Love hadn't yet knocked on her door, but Wenhui's career was at its most brilliant stage. From the outside, her life appeared to be a perfect model of success. Yet it was precisely this personality, too independent, too patient, that became her fatal weakness. In pursuit of a proper life, Wenhui had grown accustomed to silently bearing all her hardships alone. When faced with malice or harm from the outside world, her first instinct wasn't to fight back or seek help, but to force herself to endure and swallow everything inside. And from the moment she encountered her fated nemesis, Xiao, the nightmare began to unfold. Xiao was 1 year younger than Wenhui, from a neighboring village in the Xianyang area. His path to adulthood had taken an almost completely opposite direction from hers. Before even finishing middle school, Xiao had already dropped out and begun drifting through society. He had no stable occupation, no clear goals, just day after day spent scraping by with odd manual labor, mostly driving trucks for daily wages, his income unstable, sometimes eating well, sometimes going hungry. His personal life was equally chaotic from early on. He had married young, fathered 2 children, but completely lacked any sense of responsibility. Due to laziness and unwillingness to work honestly, Xiao quickly sank deep into debt. His family's finances collapsed, his marriage fell apart, and everything descended into chaos like a war-torn battlefield. If Wenhui was a sunflower always reaching toward the light, quietly growing through her own strength, then Xiao was like a vine lurking in dark corners. He couldn't stand on his own, couldn't support himself honorably, and could only survive by latching onto and parasitizing others. He needed someone to lean on, a stable source to fund his chaotic existence. By every measure, from background and education to mindset and values, these two belonged to completely different worlds that should never have intersected. Yet in 2019, fate took an unexpected turn, thrusting Wenhui into a cruel twist of destiny. Wenhui's cousin, who cared deeply about her younger cousin's marriage prospects, had intended to introduce her to one of Jia Hao's friends, hoping to help Wenhui settle down. But ironically, Jia Hao, who was merely supposed to play the role of middleman, became the one who changed the entire trajectory of this story. The moment he laid eyes on Wenhui, with her gentle appearance, calm demeanor, and unsuspecting gaze, he sensed the scent of prey. In Jia Hao's eyes, Wenhui wasn't a complete human being with her own emotions and intrinsic value, but rather a perfect target. He saw all the halos surrounding her. A registered nurse with a stable government position, a career respected by society, a clean background, a pure and kind-hearted personality, and most importantly, in her quiet, patient exterior, he detected someone easy to manipulate and control. To secure himself a long-term blood bag to leech from, Jia Hao brazenly hijacked the matchmaking opportunity. He was no longer content to stand on the sidelines as a mere introducer. He stepped directly onto the stage, making himself the central figure. Jia Hao began a comprehensive process of disguise, carefully calculating every word, action, and emotional display. He quickly identified Wenhui's greatest weakness. She had never experienced complex relationships, and her romantic history was essentially a blank page. It was precisely this innocence and lack of guardedness that made her an ideal target. Jia Hao exploited this, gradually approaching and pursuing the young nurse with an appearance of attentiveness, patience, and care. Throughout this process, he thoroughly concealed the truth that he had been married, had children, and was drowning in debt. Instead, Jia Hao wrapped himself in a different image, a man who might not have much ability or wealth, but who knew how to care for others, who was sensitive and thoughtful, and who always appeared sincere, putting his girlfriend first. Within this facade, he constructed the persona of a warm boyfriend, someone ready to sacrifice and work hard for love. Wenhui, with her pure heart and untouched emotional world, quickly trusted him. She had no necessary defenses, never imagining she was facing someone with ulterior motives. In that state, Wenhui walked step by step deeper into the trap Jia Hao had carefully laid, completely unaware that danger was closing in around her. But any relationship built on deception and pretense cannot last forever. As time passed, cracks began to appear. The mask Jia Hao wore could no longer maintain its original shape. The pretense gradually peeled away, and behind it, his true fangs began to emerge. The first crack in this relationship appeared when the lies began to crumble. Whether through a woman's sharp intuition or from unusual details in daily life, Wenhui gradually pieced together the truth. Jia Hao had been married and had children. For a girl with clear moral principles who valued emotional integrity and the boundary between right and wrong, this discovery was nothing less than a bolt from the blue, shattering all the trust she had placed in him. By all reason, this should have been the end. Any clear-headed woman would have chosen to leave. But what Wenhui and those around her failed to anticipate was Jia Hao's cunning manipulation and his shamelessness taken to the extreme. To keep Wenhui his long-term meal ticket, Jia Hao immediately rushed home, rummaged through everything to find the household registration book and marriage certificate, and in a near-manic state, forced his ex-wife to complete divorce proceedings. His 2 biological children? He didn't take custody of either one. This wasn't sacrifice for love. It was a cold, ruthless act, serving only his personal agenda. After finalizing the divorce, Jia Hao brought the documents and sought out Wenhui. In front of her, he knelt down, sobbing uncontrollably, repeatedly claiming that he had given up everything for true love, that everything he did was only to be with her. For someone as compassionate as Wenhui, this scene wasn't just shocking, It struck directly at the deepest vulnerabilities in her heart. It was a perfect display of moral blackmail. In real life, extreme and theatrical behaviors like this are sometimes misinterpreted by those blinded by love as expressions of deep devotion. But from a psychological perspective, this isn't love at all. It's a classic manifestation of narcissistic personality disorder. Willing to use any means to achieve personal goals, completely devoid of any concept of responsibility, and utterly indifferent to the consequences others must bear. Standing before the man kneeling and crying, presenting himself as someone who had sacrificed everything for love, Wenhui's deepest vulnerabilities were exposed. She was moved to tears. In that moment, her reason gradually gave way to emotion. This performance made Wenhui soften. In her eyes at that time, the man before her no longer seemed like a deceiver, but rather someone who had lost his way and was now trying to turn back. A man who had given up his entire life for love. But what Wenhui didn't realize was that this wasn't an awakening. It was the moment the demon quietly locked the gates of hell behind her. When Xiao brazenly moved into the apartment that Wenhui had scrimped and saved to buy, the real nightmare officially began. Gone was the caring mask from before. He began revealing his true nature. To conceal his own incompetence and failure in life, Xiao implemented a comprehensive system of control and suppression, gradually suffocating every aspect of Wenhui's existence. Because he had no stable job and was burdened with debt, Xiao treated taking control of Wenhui's wallet as a matter of course. Every bit of income, every expense, all had to pass through his hands. Later, when police investigated and the family compiled financial records, the truth was staggering. In just a few short years, approximately $80,000 in wages that Wenhui had worked so hard to earn had been almost entirely squandered by this worthless man. Meanwhile, Wenhui's monthly spending was less than $280. She had once been a young woman who loved beauty, who enjoyed good food and nice clothes like anyone else. Yet for years on end, she couldn't bring herself to buy a decent outfit, let alone eat at a proper restaurant. Even a $11 t-shirt she really liked, she had to wait until it went half price online before daring to order it. Wenhui lived like a diligent bee, working tirelessly day after day, accumulating sweet honey drop by drop through her own labor. But lurking behind her was a greedy parasite, clinging tight, draining everything dry. To preserve her boyfriend's dignity, Wenhui never once told her family that she was falling into financial ruin. She chose silence, bearing everything alone, not wanting her loved ones to worry, not wanting to expose Xiao's true face. But it was precisely this desperate silence that inadvertently became fertile ground, nurturing his aggression and arrogance, making Xiao increasingly confident that he could control and trample on her at will without consequence. If being drained of money only made Wenhui's life miserable and deprived, then the mental and physical violence was what truly pushed her step by step toward complete collapse. Driven by deep-seated inferiority before his far superior girlfriend and a pathological need for possession, Xiao began weaving a dense web of control around Wenhui. Wenhui's phone could be inspected at any moment, without reason. If even a single like from a male user appeared on her social media, or if she had a completely normal work-related exchange with a male colleague, she would immediately face his groundless rage. Sometimes, just because she went shopping with a close friend without reporting it in time, what awaited Wenhui when she returned home was a beating. The violence didn't stop at intimidation. From slaps at first, Xiao gradually escalated to more brutal acts, choking her, beating her mercilessly with steel pipes and folding chairs. Each time he struck, the boundary was pushed back a little further, the violence intensifying. Gradually, these beatings were no longer unusual events. They became part of daily life. Yet in front of her family, Wenhui always maintained the image of a steady pillar, the daughter who gave her parents peace of mind, the reliable sister and elder. Because of this, all the suffering she endured, she never dared reveal a single word to those who loved her most. She chose to swallow all the pain inside, silently enduring in solitude. Only in the pages of her diary, where no one could see, did Wenhui dare let her emotions shatter. She wrote in despair, "My body and soul have suffered tremendous trauma, dying and coming back to life over and over again. The feeling of losing oneself in an instant, being threatened, having a knife held to my throat. Every time after the beating, Xiao would kneel down, tie himself up, cry miserably, and beg for forgiveness. Those brief, cold, trembling words exposed a hell she had been living through day after day, night after night. It was a death spiral. Violence erupts, tears and apologies appear, promises of remorse are made, only for everything to return to the starting point after a short time. Over and over, violence, regret, then violence again, repeating endlessly with no escape. It was precisely this twisted cycle that, bit by bit, completely destroyed Wenhui's psychological defenses. What truly severed Wenhui's path to survival was when that despicable man began systematically cutting off all her social connections, step by step transforming her into someone absolutely isolated. No friends, no support, no one to call for help. Wenhui's world shrank until only she and her abuser remained. To prevent any possibility of losing control, Xiao resorted to the most despicable and vicious tactics. He took advantage of moments when Wenhui wasn't mentally alert, secretly photographing her and recording intimate videos, then weaponizing them as tools of control. He coldly threatened, if she ever dared speak of breaking up, he would send those images to her workplace, post them online, and destroy any place she had in society. For a woman who placed extraordinary importance on her reputation, who worked in a government institution, and who came from a rural background where honor and dignity were matters of life and death, this shameless tactic was nothing less than seizing her by the throat. It struck directly at Wenhui's deepest fears, extinguishing any thoughts of resistance before they could even form. Nor did it stop there. Xiao also possessed complete information about Wenhui's entire family. He brazenly declared that if she ever dared run away, ever dared leave him, he would kill her whole family. Every time Wenhui kindled the slightest thought of escape, that enormous terror would immediately drag her back to the cruel reality. In truth, during that long, dark night, it wasn't as though light had never shone through. In the early morning hours of March 26, 2024, a midnight call from the old family home that Wenhui made to her father was a faint but desperate cry for help in the final days of her life. It was one of the rare moments when she overcame her fear to beg for help. When her father rushed to see his daughter, when he saw the horrifying marks on her neck and heard Wenhui choke out that the night before Xiao had nearly strangled her to death, a father's protective instinct erupted with fierce intensity. Without a second's hesitation, Wenhui's parents and younger brother immediately rushed to the apartment while calling the police, hoping they could finally pull her away from there. But reality dealt the family a stinging blow. When police arrived at the scene, the situation wasn't treated as a threat to someone's life, but was handled through mediation. Facing Jiahao's shameless demeanor, acting as if it was all just a husband and wife quarrel, along with the murderous glances he kept shooting at Wenhui, authorities ultimately classified the incident as a domestic dispute. Afterward, terrified that Xiao would retaliate against her family, Wenhui was forced to go alone to the police station the next day to withdraw the report. She quietly swallowed all her grievance and returned once again to the deadly trap she had tried so hard to escape. It was precisely this failed cry for help that became the heaviest stone pressing down on Wenhui's heart. It made her realize in despair that even when she had reached out, even when she had gone to the police, she still wasn't protected. From that moment on, only one cold thought remained in Wenhui's mind. There was nowhere left in this world that was safe for her. The climax of the conflict between them erupted 2 months later on May 6th. This was also the final attempt by Wenhui's parents to pull their daughter out of the fire before tragedy struck. The elderly couple burst into their daughter's apartment almost without warning, hoping once more to persuade or even force Wenhui to leave. But what they found shattered their hearts. Xiao was still brazenly occupying the home, as if it had always been his territory. In front of that man, Wenhui shrank back, timid and terrified, not even daring to eat properly. The sight was more than her father could bear. All the anger, helplessness, and heartache that had accumulated over time exploded at once. He flipped over the coffee table, screaming in desperation, "He beats you like this and you're still staying with him?" At this point, Xiao also tore away every last layer of pretense. Before Wenhui's parents, he no longer feigned humility or played the role of someone remorseful. Facing their demand that he leave, he showed no shame whatsoever. Instead, he brazenly issued a chilling threat. "It's either you die or I die." In that moment, the conflict between both sides escalated to its peak, with no way back. Wenhui's father summoned every ounce of his resolve, swearing that unless he closed his eyes in death, he would absolutely never accept this marriage. In response, Xiao spat out words of malice to the very core. "Then go die. Once you're dead, everything will be easy to deal with." It was precisely this raw, brutal confrontation that became the final drop that made the cup overflow, pushing all the tensions simmering beneath the surface past the point of no return. In that impasse, Xiao suddenly realized that as long as Wenhui's parents existed, he would never be able to legitimately seize control of this cash machine. The presence of her family was the greatest obstacle to his complete domination of her life. At the same time, Wenhui had finally seen through to the true nature of the man standing before her. He wasn't just a bloodsucker, he was a ticking time bomb that could explode at any moment. If she didn't decisively sever this relationship, not only would she herself have no way out, but even her parents and siblings would be dragged into inescapable disaster. Throughout the month that followed, Wenhui chose to outwardly comply, to endure in silence, but deep inside, she began quietly preparing for her final breakup. It was a decision made in fear, but it was also the only fragile hope she had to save herself and her family. On the morning of the 20th, she calmly went through her daily routines, weighing herself, transferring money to savings, washing 4 pairs of shoes, even carefully preparing lunch for the next day. But Wenhui had no idea that directly below her building, in the cold, dark underground parking garage, the bloodsucker was lurking, silently waiting. Xiao had planned a destruction with meticulous, cold precision. He borrowed a friend's car, then deliberately transferred into it the double-edged dagger, about 16 inches long, that he always kept in his truck under the pretense of self-defense, along with a cotton blanket prepared in advance. To wait for the right moment to strike, he sat motionless for 8 hours in that damp, gloomy garage reeking of concrete. No one knows what calculations were running through his mind during those long, dragging hours. Shortly after 7 p.m., after an exhausting day of work, Wenhui returned home only to be intercepted right there in the parking garage. Caught completely off guard, she fell into a state of extreme panic. Perhaps worried that making a scene in public would cause trouble, or perhaps because her life was directly threatened, Wenhui ultimately got into the car. The vehicle rolled forward. Xiao drove east, gradually leaving behind the city center, the brilliant lights of the urban landscape fading one by one into the distance. Finally, he stopped the car at a secluded corner of a deserted intersection in Baqiao district, a place with almost no passers-by, surrounded only by darkness and terrifying silence. Inside the cramped, enclosed space of the car, all the tension suppressed for so long finally exploded. With no way back and nothing left to lose, this time Wenhui chose not to stay silent. She summoned every bit of courage and firmly spoke the 2 words she had been holding inside for an entire month. Breakup. It was the moment she tried to reclaim her right to live. But the price of that resistance was more brutal than anyone could imagine. In that instant, the narrow car interior became the source of horror. Facing the eruption of rage, Wenhui instinctively struggled and fought back, trying to protect her fragile life. Forensic examination later revealed that in her desperation, she had gripped the blade with her bare hands, leaving deep gashes across her palms, blood pouring everywhere. But her weak resistance couldn't stop the cold blade. The fatal stab pierced through Wenhui's throat, not only inflicting horrific physical pain, but severing her life forever. After witnessing the entire scene, Xiao didn't take Wenhui to the hospital. He didn't call 120 for emergency help. Instead, he calmly retrieved the cotton blanket he had prepared in advance, carefully covering the passenger seat and concealing the body that was rapidly losing its warmth. Then he started the engine and drove off into the night, wandering aimlessly through the streets of Xi'an. More than an hour passed. During that time, no one knows what was going through Jia Hao's mind. What is known is that he made no attempt to save her. He called his family, called his friends, speaking in vague, rambling sentences that made no sense. Only when he confirmed that the woman beside him had completely stopped breathing did he begin constructing a complete lie in his head. Something about killing her in a moment of lost emotional control. Something about a lover's suicide pact. Once all the lies were arranged to his satisfaction, he slowly turned the car around and drove straight to the police station. Late that night, Wenhui's parents received a call from the police. When they heard that their daughter had been murdered, the father's first reaction wasn't shock or disbelief. It was a feeling of absolute despair. Because for them, the time bomb that had hung over their heads for so long had finally detonated. On November 3rd, 2025, nearly a year and a half after the tragedy, the case was formally brought to public trial at the Xi'an Intermediate People's Court. Sitting in the defendant's seat, Jia Hao had shaved his head bald. His face was cold, betraying not a trace of remorse or regret. Facing charges of intentional homicide, Jia Hao did everything he could to deny guilt and make excuses. To save his own life, he retracted his testimony right there in the courtroom, stubbornly denying that the killing was premeditated. He argued that the 16-inch dagger was merely a toy used to scrape dead skin off his hands, that he brought the blanket only because the car was cold, and that killing Wenhui was simply the result of an argument while breaking up. He lost control in the heat of the moment, so it should only be considered a crime of passion. He even had the shamelessness to declare before the court that he loved Wenhui deeply, that killing her was because he wanted to take her with him, and that he simply couldn't manage to die himself. Those words were like salt rubbed into the bleeding wounds of Wenhui's parents. Right there at the trial, the plaintiff's attorney immediately countered with a series of sharp questions. Who uses a 16-inch regulated weapon to scrape dead skin off their hands? Who brings a cotton blanket in the sweltering heat of summer just to keep warm? And who, after killing someone in a moment of passion, calmly drives around in circles for over an hour without making any attempt to save the victim? When all the details were connected, they pointed to one undeniable truth. This was not an impulsive act. It was a murder that had been calculated and prepared in advance, a cold-blooded execution planned long ago. What made people even more furious was that Jia Hao's family, after the crime was exposed, not only never apologized but openly taunted the victim's family online. They targeted Wenhui's younger brother directly, posting mockingly that their brother in detention had food to eat, water to drink, people taking care of him, and got to see the sun every morning, all to ridicule Wenhui, who could only lie forever in cold darkness. Those words, inhuman to the extreme, completely enraged the Dong family. At the trial, Wenhui's parents declared firmly that they would give up all compensation claims. They wouldn't accept a single cent. Their only request was that the law sentence the murderer to death and execute him immediately. The father's anguished cries outside the courtroom weren't a plea for pity. They were the last shred of dignity this shattered family could preserve for their daughter. As the trial progressed, the diary that Wenhui had hidden deep in her bookshelf while she was still alive was also made public before the court. Those pages stained with tears and blood became ironclad evidence that could not be denied, directly shattering all of Jia Hao's excuses. Within each entry, people saw clearly how a girl who once loved life, who enjoyed reading, who carefully prepared her own breakfasts, had been devoured bit by bit, day by day, by violence and terror. All her pain, despair, and desperate struggles were recorded clearly, not a single detail omitted. The case of the murdered Shanxi nurse that shocked public opinion across the nation is currently still awaiting final sentencing. Although the gavel of justice has not yet formally come down, based on the consistent judicial practice of Chinese criminal law, Barring any special circumstances or unexpected variables, the outcome for Xiao is all but predetermined. The death penalty is nearly inevitable. Yet this tragedy is not simply a murder case born of romantic passion. It is a bitter self-examination, a failed test for all of society in how it perceives and responds to domestic violence. From the silence of those around her, to the hesitation of protective systems, to the cries for help that went unheard, all of these together played a part in pushing a young life to a place from which there was no return. On December 15th, 2025, in what was almost a final act of desperation, Wenhui's father managed to unlock his daughter's phone, an object the family had not dared to touch for so long. In its memory were 25 photographs. Every single one documented evidence of violence, from her eyes, to her chest, to her arms, her fingers, her back, and her legs. Nowhere was left unharmed. The young nurse who once wore a white coat to save lives had been silently enduring physical and psychological torment for so long that nothing resembling a normal existence remained. The family looked at those photos while weeping until they could barely breathe. In the end, they quietly organized all the evidence and submitted it to the prosecution, a belated but necessary act so that the truth would no longer be buried, and so that Wenhui's death would not be rendered meaningless. And that is today's case. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.